I think we resume. I don't hope I have mobbed too many participants, because it's by cutting their questions. But anyhow, okay. We have covered mostly civil aviation matters this morning, but as mentioned before, we do not have only maritime experts around this table, but we also have a security expert of German mail, Deutsche Post, WorldNet, dealing with seamless travel for parcels not only by air but also on the landway and by sea. And I think it would be extremely interesting to hear Sabine Wiedemann, what she will have to tell us about a big stakeholder's view operating on a multinational basis. So please.
Thank you, Axel. And I may confirm that I'm feeling a little bit in between, because we have transport on air, on sea, and on ground. And all the discussions touch us in a certain way. So let me start with a short overview to understand what our company means, and then I would like to give some thoughts for a discussion later on. So Deutsche Post is the world's leading mail and logistics company, and we have more than 500,000 employees. We are active in more than 220 countries, and what we try to offer for our customers are standardized solutions and products until really industrial products, supply chain solutions over the world. We are doing business express as one of our brand. We have the classical mail business, we have global forwarding, freight, and supply chain, and still we have the Post Bank. It's part of us, but we already sold it. Our group takes even a social responsibility, and I would like to mention it because it's a very, very important factor for our company. We have a Go Green initiative. We try to have a disaster response team and try to really be for our customer and the public a stable partner. We exceeded our revenue last year, 55 billion, and these are the general figures. I would like to give you some figures of our brands. We have, for mail, 72 million mail items per day, 700 million parcels per annum, and for air freight, a volume of approximately 4,300,000 tons a year. Ocean freight, you see the volume in thousands of euro, 2,900,000. Freight is 2 million full truck load movements and more than 40 million tons of transported assets. For supply chain, we have a sort of warehouse and facilities and storage capacities, 23 million square meter worldwide, and for Express, over 8 million customers. You see, this is not easy to handle, and when there is any legal initiative, we have to move 500,000 people. So what we would like, or what we would like to cover, and our needs in security are the following. We have much more complex process than 10 years before, and even the dynamic of our processes is growing permanently and constantly. So we have to rethink our way how we handle security. And this is an important message, and we learned it as well, that we need a comprehensive approach. We can't take care only on isolated initiatives or activities. So we don't have to see only the trucks, because the trucks are delivering to ports or trucks are delivering to airports, and we have to see the whole supply chain and to secure it. We have to convince, and this was a point mentioned by the audience as well, security as an added value. Not only to tell others we deliver 100% security, because it wouldn't be realistic, but to try to tell them we do our utmost and we try to mitigate the risk. The next point is we have to be seen as an added value, that we don't want to slow down the trade and interrupt it or disrupt it, but we would like to secure it and to support a flow and to have still the dynamic in the process. And our aim is still, as a passenger issue, to have a seamless transfer, but I think we are far away from this. Proactivity instead of reactivity. What we noticed in the last years, or we are active, or when an incident occurs, we try to respond to it. And with our analyzers, we would like to focus much more on threat and risk-based approaches. We have to start earlier to think about possible threats. We have to include it in our assessments. And what is really important for us as well, to think about the impacts. When we decide about security concepts and measures, we have to think about the consequences. What will be the effect to have a realistic view on the security measures? And it is especially for laws as well. When I talk about the anti-terror lists of EU, UN, or the US, it's really a trouble for a company to have a law and to try to implement it with all the problems around. Nobody thought about it, what we do with incomplete data. What's our role within? How do we handle problems with when we have, for example, only the name Mohammed on the list? How do we handle it? Do we have to stop from 72 million mail items a day, all letters with the addressee Mohammed? I think these are the practical issues, and it's a pain for us, but we try to fulfill it, but it's really extremely difficult. And we have to see no single consideration of security. We have to assess it with our operational requirements. These are part of the operational. We don't deliver security, but the operation has to fulfill, has to live security. That's why we have to look at both of it, and we have to try to combine both of it. And create resilient and sustainable procedure. It means we have to be prepared on incidents, on crisis. We know that we are vulnerable, and since 9/11 we are convinced that we are always and we will be vulnerable, so that we try really to have a definition of process that we will manage any incident and crisis. I think this is one of our major focus for the future. Research as well is for Deutsche Post DHL important issue. We would like really to foster innovation and new technologies, not only to try to concentrate on enhancing already existing ones, but to support the research to discover new fields of technologies, new fields of research. We need to be involved as an industry in research, and especially I know it because I'm a member of ESRIF, the European Security Research and Innovation Forum. We have to focus on end users. They have to be included in research because they have to buy it, they have to use it later on. It has to be a practical impact as well, that the implementation of the results will be possible. Of course, for the technology issues, our focus is laid on interoperability of systems, integration of systems, and modular systems, because, you know, technology plays a very, very important role in our handling of mail, of parcel, and so to add on always security measures, it doesn't fit all the time, and the limits are in technology and techniques. So we have to think about to integrate it, to include it, and to have a modular system where we may say this can be implemented in an easy way. Of course, and it was already mentioned here, build up synergies between security and safety. I think it's a typical problem of Germany. In other countries, it's much more easier, and it's a flow in between. But I think both principles may learn from each other, and I think we should really broaden up security and safety. Internal and external security, I think as well a little German problem. We have a lot of researchers in military area, and on the EU level we try to foster the civil research, and we have to be closer to the military research and have to ensure an information transfer, because it's already done a lot of things and good developments and good technologies. Why should we reinvent the wheel in the civil area? I know it's a very sensitive subject, but at least we should try to approach to each other. And the interdisciplinary approach, I think it's difficult as well. We have to include in research social and societal aspects. That means, we just mentioned in the discussion, the acceptance of security in the public. Or do we take more risks than 10 years before? Do we understand what it means, security? Do we expect, as a public, 100% security? I think the interdisciplinary approach of research is very important, and we have to focus much more on human factor, that he is convinced of a level of security. Standardization and legal aspects. We had this in the break, a short discussion. The mutual recognition still in negotiation. For example, AEO and CTPAT, similar programs, but different countries, and it's very difficult for a global acting company to fulfill all the requirements to get certified in Europe, to get certified again in the US, and this would be the first step to achieve a mutual recognition. But we would like to ask for more, a sort of a standardization on international level. Why could we try to develop one level and one system instead of different initiatives and parallel ones? Multilateral application, it's for Deutsche Post DHL one issue, for example, when we talk about 100% container screening. Why only US inbound? Sorry, it's not against. But it's quite difficult for us to understand it. And these are the things we would like to foster and to contribute to have really an approach and to negotiate together. Because I think security is not only a country-wide, European-wide problem. I think we have a global problem, and we should try to cover it together. Legal initiatives and acts, this is as well something we would like to remain flexible in our security measures. We know legal acts are very, very stable, and it's very hard to change them. And when once it's out and we have to follow, to change it again, as we saw it with liquids, it costs a lot of time. And even for the 100% container screening, we noticed it's still in discussion and still a problem. So think about standardization and include for legal initiatives the industry before we get only a burden and an added value of security. It's sometimes questionable. For cooperation and responsibility, of course, the industry takes a responsibility, but we have to clarify as well who has what kind of or what role in the fight against terrorism. So I think it's, in the first point, it's really the role of a government, but as well, we would like to contribute, but in a way where we are able to handle it. And the collaborative approach is, I think, not a problem anymore, because government and industry are talking together. They try to cooperate, they try to get involved in an early stage, as on EU level, and I know it from Germany as well. The industry is asked to give feedback and to comment on possible initiatives, for example, as well for a strategy of supply chain security. This should be followed up because it's essential for a successful implementation later on. Even intergovernmental cooperation, as we noticed it from US and the EU, is essential for future security measures. And we don't have to forget there are some aspects of competitiveness and discrimination. We should think about it, that the costs, for example, of security, if the industry has to pay it or the government has to pay it, this means in the impacts that it could mean for some or on smaller companies as well, difficulties to fulfill all the requirements. And at the end, I would like to talk about costs. That's normal, I think, for a company to discuss it as well. Deutsche Post DHL invest a lot of money, and in security. And I think this is an invest and not only a cost, because it's always with security and discussion, what does it mean? We pay a lot and we don't see anything. That is the question of measuring, but it will still remain a problem to measure it. And you can't say, as you mentioned, Rob, earlier, save lives. It's difficult for a company to count on this way. But I think we have to look for approaches to measure security. And even when we say about resilient processes, that we try to manage incidents and crises and try to get back to an early business. And of course, security must be affordable. Even for research, it must be affordable for a company, and we have to pay for it, and we are able to pay for it, and to have results and good products and added value on them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for your presentation. I think this will lead to the more wet areas, to maritime things. I will come back to some of your thoughts, because I also used the break for some discussion, and it was quite interesting that you raised some matters which I also had in a discussion with my colleague. So just be curious for a bit later for me to come back to these matters. Just a very general hint, as Sabine Wiedemann is coming from Deutsche Post DHL, you may have noticed that there is a big airport next door. And DHL has established a big cargo center there. So for all of you who would like to see how this happens, there are DHL people outside offering you guided visits to this field. And I think security will be an interesting aspect also there. So I take up this opportunity just discussing in theory that next door, I mean, it's 5 kilometers from here, you can see with your own eyes what's going on there and how many precautions are taken to ensure security there. But now, please, David, would you like to come in, and then we join the panel later on. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Axel. The presentation that I'll give is similar to Robert was indicating. There's no way that we can cover all the issues that have been developed in the paper in such a short time, but the paper on which this is based, if it's not on the CD, it would be available on the ITF website. I want to start off by just giving a brief history of customs, because this is where a lot of the security issues arise in terms of regulation in the maritime industry. And you'll see that the portcullis there is the traditional symbol of customs. Customs is the gatekeeper, and ain't nothing going to get past customs until they're satisfied that all the regulatory requirements are met. Some people may think this is not ancient history, it could be modern history. There was a turning point though, and late last century there was a major push, particularly from the commercial sector and through the WTO, that there should be a balance between trade facilitation and regulatory intervention. And a number of customs administrations around the world really took to this new approach. It was not comfortable for them because, after all, they were regulators. They are regulators, and so moving more towards a facilitative approach to trade was certainly not a comfortable move. In fact, a lot of them thought, well, this is at the expense of control. But there was another turning point which tipped the balance back to security and regulatory intervention. And 911 was seen by many, in fact in customs, as an opportunity to reintroduce a number of regulatory requirements that had previously gone by the board with the introduction of trade facilitation. It was seen as an opportunity by some as pushing forward a number of initiatives that had previously been refused by their political masters due to other national priorities. But it suddenly became evident to customs administrations that if they resurrected some of these initiatives and put security in the title, it was likely to get through their political masters and get the funding. And there has been quite a bit of that go on. We'll talk about that in a little while. Sabina mentioned our friends across the water, and US was in fact the first country, understandably, to introduce a number of security responses to 9/11. And without going into the detail, here are quite a number of the security initiatives that have been introduced or are considering being introduced. The 24-hour rule was one of the first. Container Security Initiative, which saw US customs officials posted in overseas ports, which I will touch on a little bit later. The CTPAT program, which most in the industry would be well aware of, which is that partnership approach. And finally, two that are under active debate at the moment, 10+2 rule and 100% scanning. CTPAT that I want to focus on more than the others is designed to provide customs in the US with a method of identifying those traders who are considered to be low risk. And if we know who the traders are, then we're likely to be able to conclude that the goods that they're trading in are likely to represent low risk. Bob mentioned something in his presentation before. He was talking about a change of emphasis from a focus on identifying dangerous objects to a focus on identifying dangerous people. Well, this is the same approach in the maritime environment. If you focus on the companies that are less likely to pose a security risk, then it follows that the goods that they're trading in should also fall into that category. Now, suddenly this went international, and the World Customs Organization, drawing heavily on those initiatives of the US, brought in what is known as the Framework of Standards. And one of the key elements in the Framework of Standards is this concept called the Authorized Economic Operator. And again, coming back on this, the partnership approach, the CTPAT approach that the US has introduced, companies that demonstrate a willingness to enhance their supply chain security are invited to become authorised economic operators. They have to put in their applications, which are verified by the various customs administrations. And the theory is that if customs internationally can identify not only traders but also service providers, even ports and airports that have a particularly high standard in security, then the focus in terms of identifying potential breaches in the requirements can be focused on the others. That's not to say that the authorised economic operators are totally ignored by customs. There may be some lighter regulatory intervention, some intervention on an irregular basis. There's been a number of risk-based responses that I would call risk-based, and these include not only customs initiatives, but also a number of initiatives that have arisen directly from the transport authorities. So at the international level, the Safe Framework of Standards and combined with the AEO initiatives managed by the WCO but then implemented individually by national administrations, CTPAT, which is in effect the US AEO initiative, and then of course the ISPIS code and the Known Shipper Program. The Known Shipper Program is an interesting one. It's in existence in the air transport sector at the moment. What it does from a transport point of view is to identify again which are those companies who have a good track record of compliance, who have good systems and procedures in place. And again, to draw the analogy with what Bob was saying earlier this morning, it's a case of doing the background checks on companies and, in Bob's case, on people, on passengers, to identify whether in fact they should be regarded as trusted traders or less of a risk than others. It does raise the question though, because with the transport industry, with the Known Shipper Program, with customs, with its AEO initiatives, we also have defence authorities who do similar checks on companies who are involved in defence-related exports. We have agriculture and quarantine authorities doing similar checks on companies that deal in their goods, and there are a number of other examples. It comes back to a point that was made earlier. There needs to be more interagency coordination in all of this, because these people are, from the business perspective, they are the same people. They are just dealing with different government organisations, and I think that's one of the bugbears of industry that perhaps Sabina was alluding to. Now, with the AEO and similar initiatives, the idea is to reduce the size of the risk pie. Regulators are faced with this concern about ensuring security, ensuring safety. Where do they put their resources? Well, the idea is that if you can identify certain operators within the international supply chain who represent a low risk, then you are in fact reducing the size of that risk pie, and you can focus your efforts on the higher risk traders, the higher risk service providers, the higher risk transport companies, etc. One of the difficulties, and again has been touched on by Sabina, is that the AEO initiative, to be truly effective, needs to be internationally recognised. It's internationally coordinated from the point of view that the WCO, the World Customs Organisation, has published the framework of standards, so they are the guidelines under which individual countries are required to implement these programs. The problem is that the interpretation of those guidelines is quite different in different countries. In fact, they are worlds apart in some cases. The one that was mentioned earlier was between the US and Europe, where they're looking at mutual recognition. Now, the way that Europe interprets AEO is that a company must have demonstrated systems and procedures which ensure security of their supply chain. But not only that, they also need to demonstrate broad compliance with other customs-related initiatives. So, for example, I could have the safest supply chain in the world, but if from time to time I undervalue or misdescribe my goods in order to perhaps defraud the revenue here and there, I would not qualify as an AEO in Europe. Others, like the US and Singapore and Japan and a number of others that have developed the AEO programs are looking purely from the security point of view. So in many cases, when countries are considering the question of mutual recognition, they're comparing apples with oranges, and the bottom line is that if mutual recognition is to occur, it's likely to be on a lowest common denominator basis, which in the security environment is perhaps not the best basis on which to make such decisions. But the impact, which is what we're looking at here, the impact on the business community, again as DPWN have pointed out, is that there is likely to be a need for companies like DPWN to put in AEO applications and have them verified and get through the process in about 170 different countries in order to do business, as opposed to doing it once or twice and having those mutually recognised internationally. So it is one of the key issues, and we've heard from previous speakers that it is a global problem that we're dealing with, and the need to treat it on a truly international level is very pressing at the moment. But there is also an increasing focus on identifying high-risk consignments rather than focusing on low-risk operators, and the 10+2 rule and 100% scanning rule are examples of this. So I'd also put the container security initiative into that category, and that's where as I mentioned earlier, one of the earlier responses by the US was to actually put customs officials in overseas ports and screen cargo prior to their export to the US. Now, interestingly, I have had discussions with 20 senior customs officials from 20 different countries, some of them developing, some of them developed, and in 100% of cases, the response to my question of why are you putting all these security initiatives into place was not to ensure the security of the supply chain. It was to ensure ongoing trade with the US. And the government's mandate was to ensure that we do whatever is required to make sure that our exporting community can continue to trade with the US. And it comes back to something that Axel said before, that when the US said, can we have more data? And the answer is, well, yes, because what's the alternative? The passengers don't go to the US, or the cargo doesn't. At the time that the 24-hour rule came out, there was a band of US customs officers going around the world telling the world about what the implications were and what it meant, and how exporters to the US would need to comply with this, and the various activities associated with that. And one of the brave souls in the audience said, "Well, seems to me like this is just putting an additional burden on the trading community." And the response was very straight and to the point: we are not imposing another burden. If you don't want to trade with the US, that's fine. It is not compulsory. But if you do, then of course you need to meet these requirements. And some of this unilateral thinking has crept in from the start, and I think this is what one of the problems is. But with these sorts of regulatory approaches, I really see that there is a need to maintain perspective. We need to ensure that a balance is achieved between regulatory intervention and trade facilitation. And it should be intervention when there's a legitimate need to do so, and it should be based on identified risk. Another common theme. It is time, I believe, to challenge the assumptions, and there is, as perhaps brutal as it sounds, there is a need to draw the line at some point. I mean, going back a few years, there was a bomb explosion on a bus in London. Well, do we screen passengers before they board a bus? Do we put hand luggage and hold luggage through X-ray machines, and do we send passengers through metal detection units before they board a train? We were talking in the break about the same sort of thing. Well, what about into shopping centres and into schools? And what's the government doing about this? I mean, where do you draw the line? Traditionally, we happen to do these sorts of things for air travel and in relation to cargo, also for maritime transport. And obviously, there are areas where these security initiatives are increasingly important in terms of road transport as well. But it is time to challenge the assumptions. But it does take a brave person to actually stand up and say, I don't necessarily agree with this security objective, or not the objective, but the security initiative. Is it in fact efficient? Is it in fact effective? Does it actually achieve what it's intended to achieve? Is it in fact no more than political window dressing? And I'd just like to turn to this slide here, which demonstrates or sets out to demonstrate the data requirements that are currently required, and at what point does the additional data actually have value to the regulators? There comes a point, if you have a look at the curve on the right-hand side, these are compliant companies. You can keep asking for every data element that is applicable to a particular person, or in this case to a particular consignment, and after a while the regulator will get a picture of what those goods are. After a while the picture is not getting much clearer, so there comes a point of optimum collection. Now, the reason why the regulators are collecting this information is to actually identify potential security problems, and the security problems are going to be coming from the non-compliers, those that are trying to put the bomb in the box. The fact is that the non-compliers are less likely to actually provide valid information than the compliers. We had a previous round table similar to this, and a very well-meaning economist, and apologies to economists in the room, said that if customs administrations were more focused on getting correct information, then it would be far easier to identify what the high-risk consignments are. But to be quite honest, I have not yet come across a shipper who's written weapons of mass destruction on the bill of lading. So there are, there are limits, and there needs to be a recognition that non-compliers, which is why this information is being collected, are not going to be providing accurate information to the regulators. So the more and more data that's collected, that's great, but how is it being used, and how can it be effectively used? We talked about before the amount of data going across on passengers into the US, and okay, one would assume that that's being used to identify against records who is a high risk, who is a low risk. But how sophisticated or crude are in fact some of the methods behind this? I always have a chuckle when one of my colleagues from Kuwait, Ahmed, went to the US for 6 weeks, and for 2 weeks, and during that 2 weeks he was randomly selected 6 times at airport security. you wonder how crude the risk profiling is. So, to sum up, I'd say that regulatory initiatives need to be scrutinised. Yes, we need to have initiatives, but we need to make sure that there is a cost-effective outcome for both business and government, and that outcome needs to be consistent. Firstly, with the desired policy outcome, is it actually achieving what it's setting out to achieve? It needs to be consistent with the nature of the operational environment being regulated, including both its commercial practices and relative security risks. And it also needs to be consistent to the extent to which the regulatory requirements are likely to impact on the operational effectiveness of the activity being regulated. So I'll just leave you with one final thought. If a trader demonstrates a commitment to global supply chain security by achieving and maintaining AEO status, does there remain a genuinely risk-based need for the trader to provide advance information to the authorities who granted him that status, and also, as now we expect, for that container to be scanned? Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think one of the very interesting aspects of your contribution was there is also a trade aspect. You said so when you mentioned containers that have to be scanned, and or not, or just they will not be shipped to a big country. So that's an aspect which we might raise later on. There are two more experts at this table, and I would like to know whether Earl, whether you could add some of your thoughts to this, and maybe more of the maritime aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. I have a lot to say, but I'll try to get it done in 5 minutes. Well, I work for APL, and we're not necessarily a household name like Deutsche Post. So let me give you a little history of APL, but 2 minutes worth. We're a 160-year-old company. Our roots are in the U.S., in fact, San Francisco. We're now based in Singapore. We trade largely in Trans-Pacific between the U.S., Asia, Latin America, and Europe. We operate approximately 130 container vessels. We have a fleet of about 500,000 containers. We manage marine terminals in both Asia and the U.S. and soon to be in Europe. And our sister company, APL Logistics, is a third-party logistics provider that does the typical functions such as consolidation and deconsolidation of freight. So in general, we see a slightly broader slice of the supply chain than many of our customers. So that'll be it for my advertisement. But I just needed you to know where I was coming from. And I'll speak mostly as an ocean carrier today. So I don't have to tell you that the economic downturn is hitting our industry especially hard. So this makes balancing security with other demands even more critical. I always like to say that we also invest in security, but we want to make sure that we get the most out of every security dollar we spend, because we're facing other problems also, be it environment or safety or whatever. But before I go on, I don't want to forget, I want to compliment David Whittleson and his co-author Stephen Holloway on their paper. I didn't agree with everything, but I thought it was well done, and I think everybody it would be worthwhile reading. So what I'd like to do here, so I stay on track, is I've identified 4 questions I'd like to address. 1, how effective is information sharing today? 2, is the private sector in favor of more security mandates or voluntary security initiatives? 3, can we justify the cost of improving supply chain visibility? And 4, is 10 plus 2 really that bad? So I'll try to get this done in 5 minutes. With regard to information sharing, I must admit this takes courage, as there are significant risks, such as communicating information without exposure to legal liability, disclosing competitive information, and weighing the consequences of exposing the wrong information. But the bottom line is we need to get over these hurdles if we are to succeed in improving security effectively and efficiently. This becomes more important as terrorists target critical infrastructure, and private industry is charged with protecting assets that are critical to entire economies of the world. Therefore, governments must begin creating a more open environment that provides improved threat information to the private sector. When it comes to developing countermeasures to identify threats, generally the public sector closes their security curtains. It really would be nice for us to be able to get a sneak peek behind those security curtains, because I think the private industry has much to offer once some intelligence is shared with us. On the question of regulatory mandates, I do recognize it's not always easy to push back on mandates that appear to be unrealistic. Undefined words in the world of politics have a lot of power. Who can be against words such as fair or safe, for example? Who can be against any initiative that improves security? Container security device, high security electronic seals, all make nice sound bites. But do they really improve security? Not really. What I tell people is sound bites do not equal sound security. You may be surprised to hear that many of us in private industry welcome intelligent regulations and not necessarily voluntary initiatives. A few of the reasons include intelligent regulations help ensure companies do not become non-competitive. So for example, if one company adopts relatively expensive security practices while its competitors do not, we're putting a competitive disadvantage. A second reason why we would welcome intelligent regulations is if we invest in an expensive technology and shortly thereafter a mandate comes down that renders that technology obsolete, we're in another bind. A third reason that's not often addressed is the nature of our competitive structure in our business through the use of vessel sharing alliances, similar to the Star Alliance with Lufthansa and United Airlines. Alliances allow ocean carriers to share space with their competitors. So it's very common that our containers will be on our competitors' ships and their containers will be on our ships. Therefore, in this alliance environment, one ocean carrier may adopt robust and costly security standards voluntarily based on best practices, but another alliance party may not. In this case, a weapon of mass destruction could still end up on the same ship, going to the same port, through the same terminal, down the same highway. The only difference would be the letterhead on the bill of lading. Bottom line, if a particular security practice is effective, it should not necessarily be voluntary. On the question of can we justify pouring more and more money into improving visibility, I contend that today, most ocean carriers can locate their containers without RFID, GPS, or other expensive gadgets. For example, when containers are on ships, in terminals, or on trains, we know exactly where they are. With just a few keystrokes, we can tell you where those containers are located, and in fact, our customers have that same ability. We estimate that we have good visibility on approximately 85% of our fleet. So one might ask if there's a better way of tracking the last 15% of our fleet other than outfitting each and every box on the planet with GPS or RFID tags. Now, I'm not saying that tracking boxes at points in the supply chain does not make sense. For example, the first leg, the last leg are good examples where we could probably improve tracking. Another example would be boxes transiting high-risk area. But then again, that's risk management as opposed to tracking 100% of the boxes with expensive gizmos. Remember, again, I'll go back to the theme, we need to get the most out of each security dollar we spend, and I think there's better ways in which we can spend our money. And lastly, so I stay on my 5-minute allocation, is 10 plus 2 so bad? I don't think so. there is certainly opposition to 10+2, but those opponents are a bit more vocal than those that are more accepting. I wouldn't characterize the opposition as widespread. Cost of 10+2 is certainly only hypothetical. Whether you believe the United States Office of Management budget estimate of between $350 million and $600 million, or the National Association of Manufacturers estimate that you quote in your, Bob, in your report of $17 billion, which assumes every single box in the supply chain receives a 2-day delay. I mean, again, it's strictly hypothetical. What I can say is today, Customs has received over 1 million filings, and according to them, and according to my anecdotal conversations with our customers, they have not experienced delays yet. Finally, just to make sure we just have some areas for discussion, I don't really think AEO traders should be excused from complying with 10+2, unless, of course, you dismiss the concept of the layered approach to security. AEO programs address largely people, process, training, and physical security, whereas 10+2 addresses information and container targeting. I think they're complementary layers and not redundant layers, in my opinion. Since time is short, I'll end my comments now, but I'd be glad to speak in more detail about these or other topics such as AEO mutual recognition, technology solutions, smart containers, or any other issues that you may be interested in. Thank you.
This sounds like an extra session this afternoon, but first, Mark, would you like to add something as you're also representing security industry?
Thank you very much, Axel. I have the benefit of going last, so therefore I can maybe tie a few pieces together in the discussion that's come before. In my brief remarks, I'm going to mention a bit about what is Cotecna. I'll also make some observations on supply chain security and come back to some of the issues which have already been mentioned by many around the table here. Cotecna Inspection is actually a company that is in the business of trade facilitation services, supply chain security services. Our main business is actually in inspection and destination inspection, pre-shipment inspection. Interestingly enough, our main customers are governments, but we also assist the private sector specifically in addressing supply chain security requirements for achieving AEO certification or CTPAT in certain cases. Cotecna has approximately 4,000 staff worldwide, 100 offices globally. We're actually a Swiss company. And one of the interesting points to note is that we're the world's leading owner and operator of large-scale shipping container X-ray scanning systems. We've been quite active in that area, very much so in the direction of addressing tax compliance issues, especially for developing and transition nations. Some of the background in supply chain security, we're participating in a number of EU supply chain security projects, including one that's called the Secure Container Data Device, which is actually a smart container. We've also participated in a Galileo project, which is related to track and trace of containers, using the GPS system with an EGNOS overlay. And we're part of a project which is developing a network of test centers for actually testing security technologies. We've been involved in the European Committee for Standardization, in the Supply Chain Security Expert Group, and the Integrated Border Management Expert Group, as well as one of our staff chaired the ISO 28001 committee for developing the ISO 28000 series related to supply chain security. We're also involved in the European Organization for Security, which represents 20% of the global market in security. We as well participated with APL in the Operation Safe Commerce program in the United States. And we're currently completing the World Bank Guide for Supply Chain Security, which addresses a number of the issues that we've been talking about around this table. So a few of my comments and general observations on supply chain security. Security has become part of the landscape, in fact, of international trade. It is already addressed quite significantly in logistics and transport, but sometimes not always under the hat of security. There have been issues that are security related which come out in safety, come out in human resources, come out in physical facilities, etc. And it hasn't always had the security label to it. So a lot of things are already there, and there are a lot of opportunities for organizations to address their security requirements just in a greater package, repackaging what they already have in essence. Obviously, there are very, very many supply chain security initiatives and programs, but there are a lot of aspects that are overlapping. And although there are broad similarities, there are definitely aspects which require an organization wanting to get multiple certifications to go through the process multiple times, covering areas that have already been covered in a previous certification process. That then requires an element which we've discussed around the table, which is the cooperation and coordination of different governments that are involved in these initiatives and programs. I'll now come to some of the issues of importance that arise out of the supply chain security area. The first of which was something we discussed a bit during the break, which is the 100% scanning requirement the U.S. has put into place with a law requiring that 100% of the containers entering the United States should be scanned by the year 2012. It is actually a situation that is developing currently, and there's a lot of question out there. Is this a viable approach? Does it fit with the risk-based management approach? Who pays for it? Is it capable of being implemented? Well, a lot of these questions have already start to be discussed, and in fact, even the U.S. Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security has already stated that there are going to be delays in the process, and most likely the 2012 deadline will not be met. In fact, the U.S. Government Accounting Office has also put out a report which indicates that there are many, many barriers to implementing this requirement. In fact, for those who might be interested, I will actually be speaking in detail on this 100% scanning requirement at the European Security and Safety Conference in Potsdam on the 4th and 5th of June. So there'll be much more information in that. So rather than taking up the time here on that, I'll go on to other issues. One of the other aspects which is brought up in a number of the presentations and discussions is mutual recognition of supply chain security programs. Obviously, CTPAT and the European Union Authorized Economic Operator are two of the most important opportunities for mutual recognition. But in looking at the situation currently with the CTPAT program not covering all of the aspects that the European Union Authorized Economic Operator program covers, and with the fact that the roadmap initially was oriented toward looking at a mutual recognition by the end of 2009, there are some questions as to whether this is actually going to happen. The next issue is also related to supply chain security, but it's related to the difference between the haves and the have-nots. First of all, there are the haves in terms of, for example, large ports, which are able to have the financing necessary to finance large infrastructure requirements, for example, scanning, for example, other aspects of security, whereas the smaller ports don't have the same financial capability to address those security issues. In addition, there's also the haves and the have-nots when it comes to developing nations and transition nations versus developed nations. The question is this going to be a competitiveness issue? Are the developing nations going to be singled out, and is there going to be discrimination, as was also pointed out in the presentation of Sabina? I think that at this point in time, this is a question that is still open. And also the issue that surrounds that again is who pays for this, especially in a developing nation or a transition nation where the costs already can be quite high in terms of a lot of the infrastructure requirements. Who's going to pay is a question that's not answered. Coming back to the layered approach, which Earl mentioned and also was mentioned by David, it's very important that the layered approach with risk management is being put into place. The question of whether or not AEO certified companies should also provide data or be required to do go through a scanning process is a question that is not easily answered. But with the layered approach, with some aspects of one layer, you may capture some activities which will allow you to say, okay, this activity is not correct, whereas some activities will pass through one layer and only be caught by another layer. So in a way, this may also be an alternative to the 100% scanning approach. If you have enough layers of security, including a risk management layer, the potential is that the 100% scanning, which is let's just try to capture everything, could actually have an alternative. Finally, one of the questions that was brought up is, what about a global supply chain security standard? The intent, and this was mentioned in a number of the presentations, the intention of the WCO Safe Framework of Standards was to become the model for the global standard. Now, whether or not, again, one of the problems was which came first. The CTPAT actually came first, and in essence, if you look at CTPAT, it doesn't actually cover all of the issues that are in the WCO Safe Framework. If countries that are implementing the Safe Framework will take care to make sure all of the elements that are there are in their program for supply chain security, it does have the potential to provide the basis for a mutual recognition country to country and program to program. So with that in mind, one of the other issues is how do you address the aspect of one country implementing it differently from another country? There may be, as one of the former U.S. presidents said, an issue of trust but verify, meaning that although there will be a supply chain security program in place with the mutual recognition, there also may be some additional checks. Finally, just to wrap up, I think that in our panel discussion or in our presentations, we've all covered a number of different issues which in sum total look at the grand scheme of supply chain security. The challenge is that a number of years ago, before 9/11, the only place where supply chain security was addressed was at the place of the port of unloading. The evolution now to cover the whole supply chain has put a complexity on this which is very significant, and this is only in the span of a few years. So the challenge is to try to reduce the complexity at the same time still addressing the security issues. So I think that is the important task of the issue of the governmental side talking to the private sector, and this dialogue is an extremely important dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I just take up your last thought, referring to a discussion we are having in this country. Once after 9/11, the civil aviation industry discovered that it was not in such a good shape as it was used to in earlier years, they invited the government to such a dialogue as you have just mentioned. And that's an instrument we are now practicing for 6 years, which is called Initiative for Civil Aviation in Germany. So that's a national tool, just a political tool without any legislative commitment. And of course, first of all, in the beginning, there was a very keen eye to respect the national legislative, executive, and whatsoever procedures. And we said, no, that's an instrument on top to improve and to speed up dialogue. Because also in this country with the federal constitution, it's even more stakeholders from the political side. And so it's our job getting these people together. And this experience was also practiced for security questions. Imagine in this country, it's not only Ministry of Transport responsible for security, but it's of course our Homeland Security Ministry is called Ministry for the Interior. And these are the guys with what we call the police mentality. Better check than everything else, and not explain why, but we know what is good for you. And now, what happens when you have a panel like this, having one guy with this philosophy and being confronted to people from the industry? It changes nature of discussion, and of course, this ministry has not entirely changed its philosophy. That would be not so good, but at least there is a new way to perceive problems also from their side, and to have this idea, okay, we have the same target, and so we should bundle our activities. And I would like to use the rest of the time we are having here, first of all, to offer the panel the opportunity to come in, as we now have covered all branches of transport and the research side. What could you give for the participants? What sort of ideas would you like to give them on their way, how to tackle these increasing problems? I mean increasing problems, there are always new aspects. We haven't had a discussion about hijacking ships, which is another new target, by the way. Be it competitor containers on one ship, but it's the same hijacker. And so there's always, the terrorists are always one step ahead of us. So what can we do? Also in the economic crisis, I think we should keep up the same standards and not loosen them. But now, up to you to add something. Maybe first the colleagues who have been busy in the morning. So I would like to start with Bob. Could you add something, please?
I do have one thought on your comment about the recent ship hijackings. I mean, if we look back at the history of aircraft hijackings, it started with poorly organized and often just individuals hijacking a plane for ransom, and then moved on from there to escalation over a period of a couple of decades. I mean, it worries me to think that we could have a similar progression of escalation of threats to shipping, ocean shipping, that goes on from today's just hijacking a ship by a small group for ransom to people trying to blow up ships, create havoc, commandeer ships, let's say a liquefied natural gas ship, and turn it into a missile aimed at a harbor. I mean, these are logical extrapolations that could happen in maritime area as they've happened in aviation. And I think we certainly ought to be thinking about how do we make sure that either doesn't happen or be prepared to cope with it if it does start to happen.
Thank you. Vlad, would you like to add something for also maybe for the regulator, what to bear in mind?
Well, I think it is increasingly clear that the clarity of the regulation is fundamental. If the regulation is not clear enough, we run into problems. First of all, we do not address the real risk. Second of all, we apply resources where we shouldn't apply resources, and we lose from the sight, where we should go with their application. I have one very recent example of a development of an unclear regulation coming on. It's not aviation security, it's not maritime security, it's school security. Yesterday, the Education Minister of France has announced that he would like to install screening equipment in order to screen people coming to the school to prevent prohibited items from entering the school. We'll all see what will happen if that is installed. In a way, I was, unhappy and happy at the same time. Unhappy because it's a very bad and costly way to deal with a problem. Happy because then the queues in our airports will start looking very short, and passengers will start complaining less as a result of that. But it goes to show what David was saying before. There is a tendency from the regulator's perspective of increasing the domain of competency and addressing problems in a very costly and not very effective way. I think we need to keep the communication up with regulators clearly, and I think we need to come to them with the functional approach, operational approach, show what in the operations will make most sense and will best address, from our view, the risks and the problems we currently face.
Thank you, Vlad. I would like to ask Sabine about, as you are a big employer, the human factor you also have mentioned. I think you're doing a lot in your training people to make them conscious of their job and their responsibility. But don't you think there's also a human factor for political decision makers?
Of course. Especially the politician. We need the politic and we need to get their support. But I think the dialogue, as Mark mentioned, it's much more important that they get the practical input of the industry so that everybody has an acceptance later on and it's feasible for the industry and affordable. And so we need to invest more time in communication issues, in discussing issues, in assessing impacts. And this would be one of the most important points, that the interest is, or the openness of the politicians to take care about a deep dive in problems and to know about impacts in a very early stage. This is the much more important point for us.
Thank you. And just an additional question. Are you convinced that politicians are willing to listen to your needs?
Willing, perhaps. But I think, okay, we have to respect the task and the objectives a little bit different. I think everybody's interested in a high security level, but a politician has to ensure in another way the public than the industry has. We have to contribute all, but I think in different ways. And to invest money doesn't mean, if you talk about €1,000, million euros, or billion, what does it mean? I think what you do and how you do it, that's the most important thing, and how you sell security. So we have to understand both sides, and especially to find a compromise how everyone could invest in the best way in security.
Thank you very much. David, just one more question. You said, I like this headline very much, risk-based responses. So that means not making la pour la, but adjusting measures to the needs of, well, the need is security, the need is seamless travel. One aspect within these systems, do you think there is a need to, on one hand, it should be visible. On the other hand, there should be the step we hope to be ahead of terrorists. Do you think there should be a means to disclose some aspects, so not to be too open in order to make sure that nobody could come into these systems? I mean, to avoid sabotage, to be very clear.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point, and I must say that I enjoy a bit of academic freedom in this sort of setting, because I'm not a politician, so I can say things that may upset politicians, and I'm not in industry, so I may well say something that might upset a regulator or a politician. Politicians always are on the end of this, because in many respects it's a case of they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. They've got to be doing something. They've got to be seen to be doing something. Your question comes back to some of the fundamentals of regulatory compliance management. There needs to be an information base from which the regulators can identify potential non-compliers. And the majority of information in relation to the movement of maritime cargo, for example, and other forms of cargo, is held by the industry itself. And there is very little that is going to be gathered by the regulating agencies that is not already known to industry. So it's very much a case of, in my view, of sharing that information, but on an exception basis. And it comes back to the point, and I know that Earl doesn't agree with everything that we say in the paper. But for example, on the 10+2 rule, it may be the case that the 2 of the 10+2 may not impose too much of a burden, but the 10 certainly does in terms of straight monetary value. For example, the 2 elements that are submitted by shippers can be sent direct to CBP, as they have done previously under the 24-hour rule. But the 10 elements that the importer is required to submit, because it's in addition to what they've normally done in terms of timing, because normally they've submitted information at the time of arrival of the cargo rather than 24 hours before loading, they're being charged $300 a consignment simply to have it lodged through a registered filer, and that's information that we got since writing the paper. So the information is there. The right information needs to be shared in order to come up with the risk-managed targeting. But we have to say, is it something that should be provided as a matter of course, as a part of regulation, or is it something that could be supplied on an exception basis? Sure, you need a platform, you need a base of regulation that everybody has to comply with, but above and beyond that, should it be on an exception rule? And the other thing that I'd like to say is that I think it's all about, in many respects, contingency planning, because we're concerned that something might happen. We're all concerned that perhaps a ship could be used as a weapon. But it's my contention that even if that happened, that's not the biggest disaster we'll be facing in terms of bringing trade to a halt. What would happen if there was such a disaster and then a note from the terrorists came to say there's actually 2 events going to happen globally, and that was one of them. And that is what's going to bring trade to a halt. So it's the contingency aspect as well.
Thank you, David. I have a logistical problem. It's 2 minutes until we have to come to an end, but there's an audience, and so I would like to ask the audience and maybe give some 5 extra minutes for this meeting if there are any questions which have not been covered yet, so please go ahead. Frau Grimm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Grimm, Deputy Research Commissioner, Federal Ministry of Transport in Germany. I have exactly 3 questions. As I understood it, the common understanding was that our responses need to be risk and threat based. But how do we measure risk? Are there really appropriate methodologies and appropriate indicators for the measurement of risk, especially if we look at the very complexity of systems? It's not only the transport systems, it's an interrelationship between different kind of sectors. Look at the complexity of supply chains, for instance. Second question. How do we measure the merit, the benefit of a security regulation? The benefit is usually measured, as I understood it, by how many lives do we save. But what about the losses we get by introduction of new regulations? The 2 examples used in the panel, the whiskey bottle and the 100% container screening example, are really excellent ones. Because if you look at the 100% container screening thing, you have a regulation, but you have no tools to really reach the goal you wanted to have with this regulation. And researchers are really struggling to find solutions how to cope with the new problems we got by this regulation, especially as there are severe threats for international free trade, for industry, for the barrier-free mobility of goods, and also competitive issues. And therefore, how do we measure also the negative side effects of security measures and regulations? Third and final question, Sabine Wiedemann had a very strong plea to get a closer cooperation between military research and civil research on security issues. I find this very dangerous because if you look what we're doing in research, especially military research, security research, it's not just, talking about how we do this or that. It's very sensible. It's a very delicate measure also for national security. And you treat a lot of, as we call it, classified information. You gain a lot of new classified information. So how do you ensure that this classified information is really treated confidential? You have too many people involved in all these projects and talks and programs. If you look, for instance, at ESRI or the European Security Research Program, this is a very transparent body and a very transparent program, so everybody knows what's happening. And those who really, the high-risk people have always means and doors how to step into this system and use this information you create. Therefore, my question is it really appropriate to have so many talks and so many, transparency don't we give terrorists just the basis for doing what we don't want to have, don't want them to do? Thank you.
Any more questions in the audience? No. Okay. Hopefully, dear Frau Grimm, you do not expect us to answer all these questions in deep, because we are so far ahead. But I think it's, I take it as food for thought, as we call it, to take with us. We may have some internal dialogue. I think dialogue also will be necessary in future. What I was thinking of when Vlad came about this news from France, school children, by the way, we have this in Berlin also, where at some difficult schools, scanning people there. But I think up to now, and I'm also referring to Gabriele Grimm, there's a general consensus in society that it's accepted not to throw a bomb, that you can trust to take an underground train or bus without anything awful happening. You can go to a shopping center, you can board a bus, a local train, and you can be quite sure that nothing will happen. But the moment when this general trust does not more exist, that's a real problem then in society. So, and all stakeholders, I think, will have to continue perceiving ways of overcoming some minorities' crazy thoughts, as I will call it, and simplifying. That's just the only thing I can do at the end. First of all, I can say it's good that there's a forum like this, and of course, it takes time and energy to fill these fora with sometimes repeating thoughts. But you see, things develop. As we mentioned before, there are now the latest development is hijacking ships, and there will be other things to come, unfortunately. So I think we have to remain together with this common task to assure secure traveling for people and to secure supply chains. So we have to coordinate ourselves also in future. What we are doing should be viable. That means cost effectiveness. The impact assessment will be important. So to prevent, that's the industry's task, to prevent governments to make legislation which does not meet the needs. A certain disclosure or certain confidence must be ensured. On the other hand, I learned a new notion today, that's societal. It was used by you, Sabine. So measures should be visible on one side, so people, our customers outside, the citizens must perceive that we are doing something. On the other hand, this must be done a way that it's not just doing something to reassure them, but it should be effective. So it remains a task, and I'm sure, unfortunately, I'm sure, it can be, could be on the agenda of the next International Transport Forum. But as we are in this job, I think we have to do it. And so it was very interesting from all of you to have your contributions. We have loads of things to be read, so I just would advise you to do so, because this would also be helpful for future dialogue. And I hope to meet once again. Thank you very much.